Likutey Halakhot on Shulchan Aruch Yoreh Daya. Rebbe Noson, follower of Rebbe Nachman of Breslov. Laws of Worms. Law 1. Based on the lesson in Likutey Moharan, Part 1:19, discussed in Laws of Ritual Slaughter, Law 2. Section 1. This corresponds to worms, the prohibition of which is essentially those creatures that crawl in the earth to which they are greatly attached. The earth is the place of greatest blemish, since the earth of this world is the lowest of all spiritual levels, and worms are most attached to it, as in, a serpent's food is earth, Isaiah 65:25, for blemish permeates the earth most of all, as discussed in Laws of Meat that was left unwatched, Law 2. Worms, insects, and reptiles are the epitome of the filth of the serpent, for they are the very filth itself. That is why they have no upright stature at all, even like that of animals, and don't even have any legs, but only crawl on the earth, as in, "You shall go on your belly," Genesis 3:14. They are very close and stuck to the earth, over which the filth of the serpent has its greatest power. Hence, their prohibition is very severe, and there are several commandments prohibiting their consumption, for they are very loathsome and detestable, the embodiment of the filth of the serpent, making the human soul very abhorrent, for they are the antithesis of the holiness of the soul. The root of all holy souls is in glory, as the Rebbe writes, Likutey Moharan, Part 1:67, which corresponds to the wholeness of the holy tongue, corresponding to the guarding of the covenant, which is the ultimate glory. See Lessons 11 and 29, as in, glorify God from your possessions. Proverbs 3:9. Crawling creatures, though, are very disgusting, the very opposite of glory. They are the epitome of the filth of the all-encompassing evil, which is the filth of the serpent, which is the literal opposite of the soul, the ultimate contrast to the wholeness of the holy tongue. Worms correspond to Esau Kavanot, Hatamid, who is the essence of the filth of the serpent, and about whom is written, "You are very despicable," Obadiah 1:2, for the serpent is the ultimate disgrace, the opposite of glory, which corresponds to the wholeness of the holy tongue, to the guarding of the covenant, the sanctity of the soul. This is what our sages meant by, "You are very despicable." They possess neither alphabet nor language, Avodah Zarah. 10a. Since the ultimate filth of the serpent has no good in it at all. All alphabets and languages, including those of the 70 nations, have some good mixed into them, even if only a bit, as our sages said. Tat means two in the Katfi language, and pat means two in the African language. Menachot 34b, Lesson 33. Esau Edom, though, is called very despicable, for he has neither alphabet nor language, and the holy letters that sustain him are extremely few and very constricted, whereas the filth is very strong, such that it covers and hides the holiness to such an extent that they possess neither alphabet nor language and are the very opposite of the holy tongue. That is why he is called very despicable. Section 2. This corresponds to worms that come from this place and which make the human soul very abhorrent, for they themselves are very detestable, as in, "You are very despicable." They are the filth of the serpent, the ultimate opposite of the holy tongue, and possess no alphabet or language. That is why worms crawl around into all places and reproduce in all types of food and drink, attaching themselves to all things, for they correspond to the essence of the filth of the serpent that attaches itself to any holy entity. They consume, rot, and destroy all things in the world that are not carefully guarded from them, and they correspond to the filth of the evil, foolish and filthy inclination, the lowest inclination of all. Likutey Moharan, Part 1:72, which attaches and entangles itself to all things of holiness, and causes a very heavy burden of sadness and laziness. All this corresponds to insects that are the filth of the serpent, as in, a serpent's food is earth, for sadness and laziness correspond to earth. As the Rebbe writes, Lesson 189, we see for ourselves that crawling insects and worms are very slow and heavy, and that their vitality is the least of all living creatures. One must therefore guard oneself carefully from this inclination for evil. With a bit of awareness, intelligence, and agility, though, one is able to distance oneself from them and to subdue them, for their vitality is very minimal and they lack any strength, so it is very easy to kill them. However, since they crawl all over the place and are very attached to things, finding their way into any holy entity, it therefore initially seems to us that it is very difficult to get rid of them. But with a bit of intelligence and agility, one can kill tens of thousands of them at any moment, for they lack any strength, as is quite obvious. The most important thing is to guard oneself very carefully when they first begin to appear in any fruit or anything else. As long as they are still inside, one may eat them, but after they have emerged, they are forbidden. Yoreh 84. This is because all things come about through thought, for without thought there would be nothing. So when thought crawls around in some holy subject, as in, my heart stirs in some good thing, Psalms 45, too then the worm, which is the main opposition to holiness, becomes attached there and seeks to crawl around in that thought as well. So one must guard the fruit of one's intellect very meticulously so that it does not become damaged, so that one does not allow them the opportunity to crawl around. But even if one's mind has become damaged and bad thoughts have begun to crawl around in one's mind, one must still guard very carefully not to allow them the opportunity to spread to the outside, as in, rebuke the beast of the reed, as the Rebbe writes Likutey Moharan, Part 1.5. The beast of the reed corresponds to Esau, to the worm, for as soon as the evil thought begins to crawl around in one's mind, one must immediately rebuke it and flee from it, and not allow it any opportunity to spread. At this point, as long as it has not yet spread, it is permissible to eat, so one must hasten to eat them before they spread outside and become forbidden. When the evil thought first begins to stir, it is still possible to transform it into good if one is careful not to allow it to leaven in one's mind, not to allow it the space to crawl around and spread. Section 3. This is why no fly ever appeared on the table of the prophet Elisha, who possessed the wholeness of the holy tongue, as in, may a double portion of your spirit come to me, 2 Kings 2:9, as the Rebbe writes in the lesson, for flies, which are insects, are the opposite of the wholeness of the holy tongue. Our sages thus said on the verse that speaks of Elisha, a holy man frequently stops by us. There, 4:9. She never saw a fly on his table or an emission on his bedsheet. Brachot 10b. For the two are interdependent. The reason why he was spared from emission was through the wholeness of the holy tongue, for which reason itself there was never a fly on his table. Thus, from this very verse our sages derive there that hosting Elisha was tantamount to bringing the daily burnt offering, for the daily burnt offering subdues the worm, which is the cause of all flies and insects. But by hosting a tzaddik, corresponding to Elisha, one is spared from the worm. For this corresponds to bringing the daily burnt offering. Study the lesson in Likutey Moharan, Part 1.28. Law 2. A fruit that has become wormy while still on the tree, the worms are forbidden to eat as a creature that crawls on the earth. Leviticus 11:41, since it is still considered as connected to the earth. But if the fruit became wormy after it was taken off the tree, the worms may be eaten as long as they have not come out of the fruit, but any that have come out must not be eaten. Yoreh 84. Section 1. This can be explained based upon what was explained earlier in the laws of signs of kosher animals, Law 2. The criterion of a kosher species, as opposed to a non-kosher one, is whether or not an illumination of the tzaddik, who is the rectification of the worlds, who sustains and shines into the dwellers on high and the dwellers below, has begun to shine into that species. The illumination of the dwellers below corresponds to the entire earth is filled with his glory, as in, arouse and sing, O dwellers of the earth, Isaiah 26. 19. For this tzaddik arouses and enlivens the sparks that have fallen below and have become embodied in beasts, animals, and other creatures, so that they not despair, for the entire earth is filled with his glory. That is why these species in which this illumination has begun to shine are kosher, whereas those in which this illumination has not begun to shine and are in the category of dwellers of the earth, upon whom the illumination of the tzaddik, as in arouse and sing, O dwellers of the earth, has not yet reached, are non-kosher species. Our eating must come from the illumination of son and disciple, which corresponds to this illumination, from which the Malkut receives sustenance. Study all this there. Section 2. This corresponds to the prohibition of eating crawling creatures, as in the verse, a creature that crawls on the earth, specifically, that crawls on the earth. That is the very essence of their prohibition, for these crawling species are literally the filth of the serpent, which is why they crawl on the earth, as in, a serpent's food is earth, Isaiah 65:25. The earth was cursed on account of Adam's sin that was caused by the filth of the serpent to give forth these species. As Rashi comments on the verse, cursed shall be the earth because of you, Genesis 3:17. It will give forth cursed things. That is why the prohibition of eating worms is only when it crawls on the earth or has come out of the fruit in which it developed, which is then also considered as crawling on the earth. This is because the filth of the serpent is as in, a serpent's food is earth, and since these creatures are the essence of the filth of the serpent, therefore the above-mentioned rectification does not reach them, for the absolute evil cannot be rectified, but remains below. So they are forbidden to be eaten, since we are unable to rectify them, and we must completely abstain from them, since they are absolute evil, to which the illumination of the tzaddik, which corresponds to the above rectification, does not reach. Section 3. Indeed, the illumination of the tzaddik that arouses and sustains the dwellers below the sparks that have fallen below is ultimately to rectify and elevate them from the earth, in which is the main bite of the serpent, as in, a serpent's food is earth. That is why the tzaddik shines upon them and arouses them, as in, arouse and sing, O dwellers of the earth, specifically, dwellers of the earth, for these sparks that have fallen below to the earth, fallen into the realm of the forces of evil, and to whom the filth of the serpent has become attached, are called specifically the dwellers of the earth, since the serpent has attached itself to them, as in, a serpent's food is earth. That is why the tzaddik enlivens them and arouses them, as in, arouse and sing, O dwellers of the earth, specifically, dwellers of the earth. For he arouses, awakens, and takes them out of the earth, out of the filth of the serpent, for he shows them that the entire earth is filled with God's glory, even in gross materiality and earth, even though it is under the sway of the realm of evil. Nevertheless, even there is it possible to find God, for the entire earth is filled with his glory, and his kingship rules over all. That is why those species that possess the kosher signs, which are signs that this illumination has begun to shine upon them, are kosher. Everything is from the earth, Ecclesiastes 3:20, and therefore all species need this rectification, as in, arouse and sing, O dwellers of the earth. But those species that crawl on the earth are literally the filth of the serpent that was cursed to go on its belly, and they develop in the earth, as in, a serpent's food is earth. They are literally dwellers of the earth to which no rectification has reached, for they are absolute evil, intense filth, which is why it is forbidden to eat them. However, Worms that grew in fruit off the tree and do not crawl on the earth are permissible to eat as long as they have not emerged from the fruit. Since they developed inside the fruit and were never on the earth, they already have some aspect of the illumination of the rectification of the tzaddik, which corresponds to arouse and sing, O dwellers of the earth. In fact, all plants and fruit grow by virtue of this rectification of arouse and sing, O dwellers of the earth. For this is the power of plant growth, which is brought about mainly through the rains. Rains, in turn, correspond to the bounty of the tzaddik, which corresponds to rains of blessing, which correspond to the bounty of the tzaddik, as in the waters of the intellect that descends from on high, as written, as the rain descends from heaven, Isaiah 55:10, the heaven corresponding to the transcendental intelligences, which correspond to the celestial orbits. In other words, when God has compassion for the earth, compassion for the sparks that dwell in the earth, wallowing literally in the earth, He showers upon them rains of blessing, which is the bounty of the tzaddik that corresponds to the waters of the intellect. These rains descend from heaven to earth, meaning the shining upon them of this rectification that corresponds to arouse and sing, O dwellers of the earth, which comes from heaven, which corresponds to the transcendental intelligences. For this is brought about through the transcendental intelligences, the celestial orbits, as explained in the lesson. Section 4. This corresponds to the rains that descend from heaven to earth and strike the earth, causing the growth of plants, which correspond to the sparks that are wallowing in the earth. The rains correspond to the waters of the intellect that shine into the sparks that are wallowing in the earth, striking them and arousing them, as in, arouse and sing, O dwellers of the earth. This is the meaning of, on that day I will answer the heavens, and they will answer the earth. Hosea 2:23, which refers to the rain, as Rashi explains there. Thus specifically, they will answer, for they will call out loudly to the earth to give forth the plants, meaning that the rain will call out loudly to the earth, arouse and sing, O dwellers of the earth, which means that the sparks dwelling in the earth should arouse and grow. This brings about the growth of all plants and fruit, for they begin to grow and ascend from the earth through the bounty of the tzaddik shining upon them, as in, arouse and sing, O dwellers of the earth, which corresponds to rain, as said. The rain corresponds to the resurrection of the dead brachot, 33a, which is why rains are mentioned in the prayer for the resurrection of the dead, since they are literally a resurrection of the dead, since they revive the sparks that have fallen below into literal death. That is why our sages said, a rainy day is as great as the day of the ingathering of the exiles, Tanit. 8b, for the ingathering of the exiles corresponds to the ingathering of the banished and fallen sparks, as in, He will gather in Israel's banished, Psalms 147. 2. This corresponds to rain, for an ingathering and elevation of the sparks is brought about through rain as well, as in, arouse and sing, O dwellers of the earth. That is why sustenance and food come mainly through rain. Sustenance comes through the illumination of sun and disciple, as explained in the lesson, which is the source of rain, as in, as the rain comes down from the heavens, which corresponds to the transcendental intelligences, from which comes the illumination of sun and disciple. Hence, sustenance comes through rain. This answers the question that everyone asks, why did the Torah express the reward for fulfilling the commandments as rainfall, as written, if you follow my statutes, I will bring your rain at its time, Leviticus 26:3, and if you obey all my commandments, I will bring rain for your land at its time, Deuteronomy 11:13 and 14. However, rainfall indeed alludes to the reward of the world of the future. Rainfall is the illumination of the transcendental intelligences through which the tzaddik shines into the dwellers below, as in, arouse and sing, O dwellers of the earth, which corresponds to rain, as said earlier, which itself is a foretaste of the world of the future. This is because the essence of the world of the future corresponds to the illumination of the transcendental intelligences, which correspond to, "Now it will be told to Jacob and to Israel what God has done," Numbers 23, which corresponds to the transcendental intelligences, as in, "What? This then is, I will bring rain for your land at its time," specifically at its time, as in, "Now it will be told to Jacob and to Israel what God has done," which corresponds to the transcendental intelligences through which comes rain. So that is the ultimate promise, that there will be rain of blessing, which corresponds to the illumination of the transcendental intelligences, as the Rebbe writes there on the verse, "You give them their food at its time, for food comes through rain." All this comes about through its time, as in now, which corresponds to the transcendental intelligences that comes through the illumination of the tzaddik into the dwellers on high and the dwellers below. For even the illumination of the dwellers below, as in, "Arouse and sing, O dwellers of the earth," also comes about specifically through the transcendental intelligences. For through the tzaddiks attaining the transcendental intelligences, he has the power to arouse and rectify the dwellers below, as in, arouse, as can be understood from the lesson. Section 5. Hence, all plants and all fruit come into existence through the illumination of this rectification of arouse and sing, O dwellers of the earth, for through this they emerge from the earth to grow and blossom. That is why the Torah did not forbid us from eating any type of fruit, and all fruits are kosher to eat, for they all come about through the illumination of this rectification, from which comes the permissibility of foods. That is why worms that come into existence inside any fruit detached from the tree may be eaten as long as they have not come out of the fruit, for they have come into existence from the fruit itself, which corresponds to this rectification, which is from what the fruit itself came into existence. Thus, worms that came into existence inside such fruit are permissible, since they too embody the illumination of the rectification. Because they came into existence inside the fruit, they grew and came into existence through the muth. Rectification through arouse and sing, O dwellers of the earth. But if the worms have left the fruit, then they are considered a crawling creature on the earth and are forbidden to eat, for the essence of the prohibition is the crawling on the earth, over which the filth of the serpent has the greatest power, as in, "A serpent's food is earth," Isaiah 65:25. Similarly, when the fruit became wormy while still on the tree, these worms too are considered as a crawling creature on the earth, since they developed while the fruit was still connected to the earth. So they are considered as crawling on the earth, for it draws nourishment from the earth, in which is the root of the power of crawling creatures that embody the filth of the serpent, for which reason they are forbidden. However, when the fruit is already detached and its connection to the earth has been severed, then the worms have developed only from the body of the fruit. That is why they may be eaten, for the body of the fruit is kosher, since the fruit comes about from the rectification, from arouse and sing, O dwellers of the earth, which corresponds to rainfall. Similarly, worms that develop in the carcasses of animals after ritual slaughter are also permissible. Yoreh 84:16. For the creature has already been rectified through the ritual slaughter, which itself corresponds to the illumination of this rectification, as explained in Laws of Ritual Slaughter, Law 2. That is why even the worms that develop in meat after ritual slaughter are also permissible. But worms that develop in meat prior to ritual slaughter are forbidden, since even kosher animals require the rectification of ritual slaughter, specifically because living creatures possessing a living spirit require greater rectification. So, worms that cannot be rectified by ritual slaughter, Chulin 67b, are forbidden, whereas if they developed in the meat after ritual slaughter, they are permissible, since they have already received the above rectification through the ritual slaughter of the animal. Law 3. Regarding the Torah's multiple prohibitions of eating worms, Yet worms that develop in fruit after they are detached from the tree are permissible as long as they have not left the fruit. Yoreh 84, based on the lesson in Likutey Moharan, Part 2, 12. Study there the entire lesson well, for it is very, very deep. In sum, even if one has fallen greatly into doubts and questions about God, one is still able to return to God, for the descent is for the purpose of the ascent. This is because the root of the entire creation is glory, since the entire earth is filled with His glory, for God's glory is embodied in all of the 10 sayings with which He created the world. But there is a limit to each aspect of glory that is embodied in each of the sayings, so that it will not spread out to external places, as in, I will not give my glory to another. However, from where then do the filthy places receive their sustenance? The answer is from the concealed saying, from which, due to its great concealment and hiddenness, they are able to derive nourishment. This concealed saying corresponds to where, which is the concealed saying of Breshit. That is why when one falls into such places that correspond to the filthy places and sees oneself as being distant from God's glory, since God's glory is certainly missing from these places, then one must begin to pine and long and beg and seek, where is the place of His glory? Since one sees that one is distant from God's glory, then even though one has indeed fallen into such a place, into the filthy places, nevertheless, since one now seeks and begs, where is the place of His glory? Through this, the descent is transformed into an ascent. This is because where is the place of His glory corresponds to the supernal glory, to the concealed saying, which corresponds to where, from which these places receive sustenance, because it is so very hidden and concealed. So now, through begging and seeking, where, one thereby ascends to the ultimate, to the supernal glory, to where. Study all this there well. This corresponds to where is the lamb for the offering. Genesis 22:7. These filthy places correspond to the distortions and fantasies of the heart, as in, my heart is spinning, Psalms 38:11, for which one must bring an offering. Then, through where, one rectifies this, for the descent is transformed into the ultimate ascent, which becomes the burnt offering that must be brought for fantasies. This is, where is the lamb for the offering, for through where the lamb for the offering is attained. Study all this very well and understand deeply. Section 1. All worms and crawling creatures correspond to the filthy places, for they are despicable, disgusting, and filthy creatures that come into existence from the filth and spoilage of all things. As we see for ourselves, when something rots and spoils, it eventually becomes infested with worms. That is why the Torah forbade us to eat such things, since they are very distant from His glory. All our eating and actions must be solely for the glory of God, whereas all things that are distant from His glory we must distance from ourselves. But nevertheless, worms that develop inside detached fruit are permissible to eat, as long as they have not emerged from the fruit, as our sages derived from the verse, any crawling creature that crawls on the earth, Leviticus 11:41, that the prohibition is only when it crawls on the earth, which is if it has emerged from the fruit. With this, the Torah alludes to us that even worms that are disgusting and abominable, corresponding to the filthy places, meaning that the fruit has become spoiled to the extent that worms have developed in it. Nevertheless, we are allowed to eat them as long as they have not left the fruit. This is because as long as the spoilage is inside the fruit and has not emerged outside, there is still a possibility for rectification, for in fact, even in the filthy places and even in crawling creatures, there is divine life, for without God's life force, they would not exist at all. However, they receive their life force from where? From the concealed saying, which corresponds to where is the lamb for the offering. That is why tola worm is the same letters as olat burnt offering for the life force of worms, which correspond to the filthy places receive their life force from. Where is the lamb for the offering? And the reason why the Torah alluded this to us in the laws of worms is because when a human being falls into such places, then as long as he still seeks where is the place of his glory, then there is still hope for him, as said. Thus, even the worms that correspond to the filthy places that develop in fruit are still permissible to eat as long as they have not emerged to the outside. For when they emerge to the outside, they are then forbidden as a crawling creature that crawls on the earth. For the prohibition of a worm is only when it leaves the fruit and crawls on the earth. This is because the fact is that the entire earth is filled with God's glory, specifically the entire earth. For the ultimate manifestation of His glory is from the earth, as in, the earth shined from His glory. Ezekiel 43:2. Since the earth corresponds to the Malkut, which corresponds to glory. See Likutey Moharan, Part 1, 4 and 49. In the earth are manifested all the 10 sayings with which the world was created, for the root of them all is in glory. And these 10 sayings correspond to the 10 levels of sanctity that are embodied in the earth. The epitome of the earth is the land of Israel, which contains all 10 levels, Kalim, chapter 1. And anywhere in which there is any holiness is considered a minor temple and contains an aspect of these 10 levels of holiness, which correspond to the 10 sayings that embody God's glory, as in, the entire earth is filled with His glory. But the filthy places do not embody God's glory. For, I will not give my glory to another, yet their life force comes from the concealed saying. So when one falls into such a place, one can have compassion on oneself and realize that one's place is distant from God. And since it is distant from God, it is not called a place at all. For all filthy places are not called a place at all. As written, all tables are filled with vomit and defecation without a place. Isaiah 28:8 and without place there. 5:8. This is because the essence of place is a place in which there is an indwelling of holiness, for which very reason it is called a place after the godly holiness. For God Himself is called a place. The place of the world, Genesis, Rabbi 68:9. And as we refer to God, when we say to someone, may the place have compassion on you, Shabbat 12b. Thus, only places in which there is some indwelling of holiness are called a place, whereas the filthy places are called without place, for they should not have been created at all, and even God Himself regrets, so to speak, having created them. Sukkah 52b. Hence, when one falls into such places, one should realize that one now has no place at all, since these places contain no glory of God and are not called a place at all. One must then beg and seek, where is the place of His glory? For as long as one is in such places, one indeed has no place at all and roams about the earth, as Cain said about himself, you have banished me today from the face of the earth, and I will be concealed from your countenance, and will wander about the earth. Genesis 4:14. This is because, as a result of a person's sinning and becoming distant from God, one has as if returned the world to its original chaos, and has as if completely destroyed the world, so therefore one indeed has no place at all. But when one is able to at least realize the truth and acknowledge one's having caused great blemish and damage in destroying the entire world, on account of which one has no place at all, for these external places are not called a place at all, since they are without place, when one realizes, acknowledges, and believes all of this, and begins to introspect and have compassion on oneself, asking, where is the place of His glory? Then one ascends the ultimate ascent, up to the supernal holiness of all holiness, to where, which is in fact beyond place, for where is above place. Thus, the descent is transformed into the ultimate ascent. For the great descent of falling into a no place at all which corresponds to the primordial chaos which is below, place is now transformed, and one thereby ascends to the highest level of beyond place, corresponding to where. That is why the worms that develop in fruit are permissible to eat as long as they have not emerged to the outside to crawl on the earth. For as long as the damage is inside the fruit and does not emerge to the outside, but only remains in its place, there is still hope through where, which is the vitality of these places. But when it begins to emerge to the outside and to crawl on the earth, meaning that it seeks to claim a place for itself upon the earth with its filth, this is like what happens to many who, on account of their fall, then seek to leave completely and establish for themselves a place upon the earth, proclaiming that they will now go and enjoy this world. This happens as a result of their great falling away from God's glory and seeing how distant they are from His glory, so they leave completely and seek to crawl upon the earth to enjoy this world. Woe to them! Woe to their souls! But as soon as they seek to enter into this world, the filth intensifies even more. For wherever there is no holiness in this world, there is greater filth of the serpent, as in, a serpent's food is earth. The Torah alludes this to us with the worm that corresponds to the filth of the serpent, to the filthy places. As long as it is still inside the fruit and does not come out to crawl on the earth, it is still permissible to eat, for there is still a possibility to return it to holiness and to elevate it to its root, to where, corresponding to where is the lamb for the offering, which corresponds to the olat tamid daily burnt offering, the letters of which are tola worm, and the worm can be transformed into the burnt offering, which corresponds to where, to the concealed saying. But once it has emerged to the outside, to crawl upon the earth, then it is non-kosher and is forbidden to eat. For on the earth one may only eat things that contain holiness and God's glory. So those filthy places which are very earthy, and to which the filthy of the serpent is very attached, as in, a serpent's food is earth, cannot be rectified other than by elevating them from the earth, from place altogether. In other words, when one is able to discern in oneself that one has no place at all, and asks and seeks, where is the place of His glory? As in, you will seek from there your God, Deuteronomy 4:29 specifically, from there, as cited in the name of the Baal Shem Tov by the Degel Machane Ephraim. Teitzei meaning from the specific place in which one is, and one does not go further outside, then the descent is transformed into an ascent. Hence, as long as the worms have not emerged to the outside, they may be eaten, as long as one does not leave to crawl on the earth and establish a place for oneself on the earth, but rather seeks God from wherever one is, as in, you will seek God from there, and you will find, specifically from there. For one realizes that one has no place on earth at all. Then one is able to ascend the ultimate ascent, for one then attains where? The concealed saying, corresponding to where is the lamb for the offering. Section 2. That is why we recite the section of the daily burnt offering before prayers when we are rectifying the world of action. Through the burnt offering we elevate the sparks from the depths of the realm of evil and raise them up into holiness, accomplished through where is the lamb for an offering, through which we elevate the sparks from the depths of the realm of evil up to the supernal holiness, to where. This corresponds to the olat tamid daily burnt offering, which is the letters tola worm, meaning we transform the worm, the filthy places of the outside, into the burnt offering. That is why sacrificial offerings ascend to the infinite Zohar, Part 2, 239a. For we elevate the sparks from the depths of the realm of evil, from the filthy places that are descent for the purpose of ascent, raising them up to where, which is the concealed saying, which corresponds to the infinite, corresponding to where is the lamb for an offering, the lamb for the daily burnt offering. Section 3. This is what is written. If your sins will be red as tola crimson, a worm they will become white as wool. Isaiah 1:18. Through repentance, by not despairing of oneself no matter how deeply one has fallen, but consistently begging and seeking for God's glory under all circumstances, one will be able to ascend the ultimate ascent up to where, which is the concealed saying through which all of one's sins are forgiven. That is because forgiveness for all sins ultimately comes from where. As in, forgiveness is with you, Psalms 130:4, specifically with you, for where is the concealed saying, corresponding to Keter, to the 13 rectifications of the beard, which correspond to the 13 attributes of compassion, from which forgiveness arises, as in, who bears iniquity and transgression. The rectifications of the beard correspond to tsemer wool, which is the letters Meitzar narrows, as in, from the Meitzar I called out to you, O God, there, 118:5, as explained in the Kabbalistic intentions, Tameh, HaMitzvot, Kedoshim. This is, if your sins will be red as a tola worm, they will become white as wool. This speaks of one who has fallen into very grave sins, which correspond to a worm to the filthy places. Nevertheless, one must beg and seek and search for where is the place of His glory, and refuse to abandon one's place and exit to the outside, which is the gravest sin of all the gravest sins in the Torah, despairing of oneself and abandoning completely, as in, one who has studied and abandoned is the worst of all. Pesakim 49b. One must never abandon one's place, as in, if the ruling spirit rises against you, do not abandon your place. Ecclesiastes 10:4, no matter what. Even though one sees how greatly blemished and damaged one indeed is, how very distant one is from His glory, nevertheless, one must have compassion on oneself, constantly seeking and searching and begging, where is the place of His glory? Indeed, there is certainly no place to which one can flee from God. As written, to where can I flee from your countenance? If I ascend to the heaven, there you are. If I lay my bed in hell, here you are. Psalms 139:7-8. And what benefit will one have if one follows one's lusts? For in the end, one will have it very bitter. So, ultimately, whatever one does to rescue oneself will certainly be a great relief. So one must strengthen oneself time and again. And even if one is only very minimally successful in rescuing oneself, nevertheless, that little bit will be immensely enormous in the end, as if one has found a great treasure, for in the end, nothing will remain except that little bit that one has rescued that one time, as if having rescued something from a fire. All this is very obvious to anyone who does not seek to delude themselves, but sincerely introspects and contemplates one's ultimate purpose with honesty. And since one looks deeply inside and realizes that there is no purpose and hope and good in this world, other than to do God's will and to come close to His glory, but seeing how very distant one is from that glory, one seeks and searches for, where is the place of His glory? Through this itself, one ascends the ultimate ascent, up to where? To the concealed saying, which corresponds to where is the lamb for the offering? Through this searching and seeking for God's glory, through this arises the lamb for the offering to atone for all of one's blemishes and all of the distortions in one's heart, which is the transformation of the tola worm into the olat tamid daily burnt offering. This worm corresponds to the filthy places, as said, which is a very strong and difficult force of evil that surges every day to consume the world, which is why it must be transformed every day from tola into olat ascent through the daily burnt offering. The daily burnt offering, which is the lamb for the offering, is brought about through the seeking and searching itself. By seeking and searching, even when one has fallen into these places, the filthy places that correspond to tola, to seek and search even therefore, where is the place of his glory. Through that itself, one transforms Tola into Olat, which corresponds to where is the lamb for the offering. Then all of one's sins are atoned for, since this is the very source of forgiveness, for the daily burnt offering that is the lamb for the offering atoned for all sins. This was because the morning daily offering atoned for the sins of the previous night Midrash Tanchuma Pinchas 13, since the sacrificial offerings ascended to the infinite, which corresponds to where, from which forgiveness arises, which corresponds to the 13 attributes of compassion. Thus, if your sins will be red as a worm, they will become white as wool, specifically as wool, which corresponds to the rectifications of the beard that come from where, which is attained by transforming Tola into Olat through seeking and searching, which corresponds to where, which corresponds to wool, to the rectifications of the beard, to the 13 attributes of compassion, through which God forgives all the sins of his people Israel. Amen and Amen. Section 4. Thus, when Cain said, "You have banished me today, and I will be concealed from your countenance," Genesis 4:14, he was thereby repenting, as stated in the Holy Zohar, Likutey Zohar 69:115b-4. As our sages said, Cain had caused very great damage. Leviticus, Rabbi 10:5. Since the filth of the serpent, which corresponds to a Cain nest of filth, Zohar, Part 1:54, corresponding to the filthy places, had taken control over him. But Cain realized how very distant he had become from God's glory, so he acknowledged that he no longer had any place in the world, for these places are without place. That is why he said, "You have banished me," for he had no place in the world, and "I will be concealed from your countenance," for he is so distant and hidden from him, from his glory. Through this itself, looking into himself and realizing how distant he was from God's glory, he attained where. That is why God set a sign for Cain, upon which our sages comment, "He grew for him a horn," Midrash Tanchuma, Genesis 10, a horn that corresponds to the horn of the shofar, which corresponds to the horn of the shofar of Isaac's lamb, as in, where is the lamb for the offering? This is what is stated. When Cain repented, then God set for him a sign, Likutey Zohar 69:115b, for seeking and searching for. Where is the place of his glory? Is itself the essence of repentance, as explained in the lesson, through which one is able to ascend the ultimate ascent, up to where? To the concealed saying, which corresponds to where? Which corresponds to the sign, which corresponds to the horn of the shofar of Isaac's lamb, as in, where is the lamb for the offering? Law 4. Regarding the prohibition of worms, which are forbidden specifically when they crawl on the earth, meaning those worms that develop in things attached to the earth, or that have emerged from things detached from the earth, only then are they forbidden as crawling creature on the earth. But if found in something detached, from which they have not emerged, they may be eaten. Yoreh 84. Section 1. Let us first explain a bit of the allusions that shine into my mind regarding the awesome story of the 7 beggars, specifically the story of the 6th day of the beggar without hands, who came forward and boasted of the amazing power that he has in his hands. Study there the entire story of the princess, who was kidnapped by a king, who saw in a dream that she would kill him, so he considered what to do with her, which damaged the love between them, after which she fled from him into the palace of water that was surrounded by 10 walls of water. The king took his entire army and pursued her, shooting 10 arrows into her, but she ran through the 10 walls of water, where she remained weakened. The beggar without hands is able to heal her, for he has this power in his hands to be able to extract all of the 10 types of arrows, and is also able to enter through all of the 10 walls of water. He also knows all 10 types of pulses and is able to play all the 10 types of melodies that are her healing. Study all this there well. Section 2. The mystery of this story is concealed from all worlds. Nevertheless, each individual is permitted to seek and search for some allusions to the extent of one's ability, as I understood from the Rebbe's holy words. So, the princess corresponds to Jewish souls, which are called a princess, as in, listen, O daughter, and see Psalms 45:11, and as in, all a princess's glory is inside, there, verse 14. The king kidnapped her. This is the inclination for evil, as in, an old and foolish king, Ecclesiastes 4:13. He saw in a dream that she would kill him. The inclination for evil sees and knows that ultimately Jewish souls will overcome it and kill it and banish it from the world, as in, I will banish the spirit of defilement from the world, Zechariah 13:2, corresponding to the slaughter of the angel of death, which is the inclination for evil, as in, one who slaughters a thanksgiving offering, which refers to the slaughter of the inclination for evil, Psalms 50:23, Sanhedrin 43b, today. He considered what to do with her, which damaged the love between them, after which she fled from him, even when the Jewish soul is captive to the inclination for evil, since it sees that ultimately the soul will overcome it. It therefore begins to think what it can do to the soul, which damages the love between them. Initially, there was some love between the Jewish soul and the inclination for evil, since, as a result of its great exile in the domain of the inclination for evil, the soul forgets its own greatness and develops some love and connection for it. However, once the soul realizes and understands that the inclination is scheming against it and seeks to entirely destroy it, it therefore begins to fight back against it and to make its own plans against it, how to escape from its power. The love and connection between them are therefore damaged so that it flees from it, as in Jacob fled, Hosea 12:13, Jacob, who is the embodiment of all Jewish souls, and as in, the people had fled, Exodus 14:5, and as King David said, if only I had wings like a dove, I would hasten to flee, Psalms 55:7 and 9. The king took his entire army and pursued her. The inclination for evil gathers all of its soldiers and pursues the Jewish soul. For when it sees that the soul is attempting to escape and flee from it, it gathers its entire army to pursue it. For the more the soul fights against it, the more it fights back against the soul. As our sages said, whoever is greater than another, the greater is their inclination for evil. Sukkah 52a. The king caught up with her near the castle of water that has 10 walls of water surrounding it. But she ran through all of the 10 walls of water until she reached the inside. Water corresponds to knowledge and Torah, which are called water, as written, the earth will be filled with knowledge of God, as water covers the seabed. Isaiah 11:9, and, oh, all those thirsty, go to the water, there, 55:1. These 10 walls of water correspond to the totality of the Torah that contains the 10 commandments, which correspond to the 10 levels of prophecy, Likutey Moharan, Part 2, 8. But it is impossible to enter into the waters of knowledge, to come to know God other than through the Torah, which corresponds to walls, partitions within the waters of knowledge that flood like a sea. It is impossible to receive any knowledge on account of its great abundance, and impossible to enter to come to know God because of the great abundance of light, since the profusion of oil causes the extinguishing of the candle. So only through the power of the Torah, which is founded upon faith, as in, all your commandments are faith, Psalms 119:86. All faith is called a wall, as written, I am a wall, Song of Songs 8:10, which Rashi explains as meaning, strong in faith as a wall. Whoever has accepted the Torah upon themselves, who knows on their own, or who has received from their teachers the ways of the gates of these 10 walls of water. which are the ways of the Torah, is able to enter through all of the 10 walls, all the way to the inside. But whoever does not know the ways of the Torah and enters into the sea of wisdom and knowledge without Torah will be drowned and will sink for eternity. These are the natural scientists who correspond to the kingdom of evil that enters into the sea of knowledge without Torah and drowns there in denials, becoming lost from both worlds as a result. But the Jewish soul flees through all of the 10 walls until it reaches inside, meaning that it flees from the inclination for evil into the Torah. As our sages said, if that disgusting one meets you, drag it into the study hall. Sukkah 52b. The king instructed to shoot all of the 10 types of arrows at her. This corresponds to the great uprising and attacks that the forces of evil make most of all against Torah scholars, who devote themselves to Torah, whom the depths of the sea attack most of all. As our sages said, they leave the entire world alone and attach themselves only the Jewish people. And furthermore, among the Jewish people, they leave them all alone and attack only the Torah scholars. As written, it acted greatly, Joel 2:20. It acted against the great. This corresponds to the 10 types of arrows that the king shot at the princess who had fled into the walls of water. He shot all types of evil poison into her to overwhelm her with all his power, with all the 10 crowns of filth, against the soul of the Torah scholar that flees into the Torah. She fled into the 10 walls of water, which is the Torah, and became weak on account of the poisonous arrows that were shot into her. The beggar without hands heals her, for he has this amazing power in his hands, which is essentially through the 10 types of melody that correspond to joy, as written, upon a 10-stringed instrument and upon a lyre, for you have gladdened me, O God, in your works. Psalms 92:4, as the Rebbe writes, Likutey Moharan, Part 2, 24. This is because the essence of these arrows, which are the power of the realm of evil, is through sadness, as in, a serpent's food is earth. Isaiah 65:25, earth corresponding to sadness and sloth, as the Rebbe writes, Likutey Moharan, Part 1, 189. For the main upsurging of the inclination for evil is regarding the blemishing of the covenant, since the essence of the inclination for evil is fornication, as the Rebbe writes, Likutey Moharan, Part 1, 2, and the lust for fornication and the blemishing of the covenant is caused mainly by sadness, as I heard from the Rebbe, cited several times. Likutey Moharan, Part 1, 169, Sikot Haran, 129. That is why the specific power of evil that is related to the blemishing of the covenant is called Lilith, from the root meaning of Yelala, wailing and sadness. This is why the Rebbe instituted reciting 10 chapters from Psalms for the rectification of the covenant, corresponding to the 10 types of melody, which correspond to joy. For the main blemishing of the covenant is caused by sadness, as in, God was saddened to his heart. Genesis 6:6, which refers to the generation of the flood who blemished the covenant and wasted their seed on the earth, in contrast to the rectification of the covenant that is brought about through joy, corresponding to the 10 types of melody. Thus, the Rebbe writes elsewhere, Likutey Moharan, Part 1, 24, that the exile of the Shekhinah is caused mainly by sadness, which is why the healing of the princess, the Jewish soul, is through the 10 types of melody that correspond to joy. But this entails knowing all of the 10 types of pulse, which are known through possessing the power in one's hands to transmit wisdom to all appointees in the world, as the Rebbe writes in the story. This is because the one who would heal needs to know the specific illness and fall of each individual, which corresponds to knowing the pulse of the princess of the Jewish soul. This corresponds to, take for yourself Joshua, a man in whom there is a spirit, and rest your hands upon him. Numbers 27:18. The resting of the hands corresponds to the power of transmitting wisdom through one's hands. This is, a man in whom there is a spirit, who knows how to work with the spirit of each and every individual. Numbers, Rabbah 21:15. Who knows the spirit of the pulse of each one? Who can discern in the pulse, which corresponds to spirit, all of each individual's shortcomings and illnesses, and how to heal them, how to evoke the rectification of joy into them from the 10 types of melody. Section 3. The Rebbe's words, especially in this story, are both collective and individual on all levels. On the collective, the princess corresponds to the Malchut of holiness, that is the root of all souls, the root of all worlds, all of which were created in order to manifest God's kingship specifically through the lowly human being. The king seized her. The Malchut of evil that devolved from the dregs of the primordial kings who died and were destroyed, of whom 288 sparks remained. Etz Chaim, 8, 4, from which the forces of evil that correspond to the Malchut of evil draw nourishment, constantly seeks to overpower the Malchut of holiness, which corresponds to the princess, to kidnap it for itself, to conceal God's kingship from the world. The princess fled into the water. This corresponds to the earth was chaos and void, and darkness covered the earth, which corresponds to the worlds that were destroyed, from which the Malchut of evil draws its power, corresponding to the 10 types of arrows, and the Spirit of God, the Spirit of the Messiah, the Malchut of holiness, which is the kingship of the Messiah, when God's kingship will be manifest for all to see, hovered upon the surface of the water, which corresponds to the 10 walls of waters into which the Malchut of holiness, the kingship of the Messiah, fled. It hovers as one who has become ill and weakened to the edge of death, such that the Spirit hovers above. Water is the mystery of the light of the new Ma. Hashem spelled out Yod-He Vav-He, which is the world of rectification, Etz Chaim 9:6. As Mayim, water is a manifestation of Ma in the root of the 4 fundamental elements. As known in the writings of the Adi there, 42:1, the Tanta, cantillations, vowels, serifs, letters, corresponds to the 4 names of Ab, Sag, Ma, Ben, which are the worlds of emanation, creation, formation, and action, from which the 4 fundamental elements, fire, air, water, earth, devolved, corresponding to inanimate, plant, living creature, and speaking creature. The breakage was mainly in Ben, and the rectification is through the new light of Ma. Hence, the breakage was in earth, which corresponds to the world of action in which the forces of evil have their greatest power, as in, a serpent's food is earth. This rectification was brought about through Mayim, which corresponds to Ma, for the root of fire, air, water, and earth correspond to Ab, Sag, Ma, Ben, so earth corresponds to Ben, in which the breakage took place, while water corresponds to Ma, from where the rectification comes. That is why water purifies from all defilements, and why it is impossible to enter into any holiness other than by purifying oneself by immersion in water, such as is the case with priests before their service. A wife for her husband, as well as the purification of the Jewish people when they entered into the covenant at Torah giving, and the purification of a proselyte upon entering into the Jewish faith, they are all purified through water. This is because water corresponds to the light of Ma, which corresponds to the rectification from which purification comes. However, the Malchut of evil attacks the Malchut of holiness, even though it has fled into the water, shooting it with the 10 types of arrows, for the rectification was not complete, and 288 sparks remained among the realm of evil that were not rectified. These sparks are the source of the power of the forces of evil, from which arise the 10 types of arrows that correspond to the 10 crowns of filth, which all arise from these dregs that are still powerful even after the beginning of the rectification by virtue of the sparks that remained in their domain. This is why water itself can become defiled, for defilement is very attached to water, for the moment some rectification begins, and until it has been fully completed, The forces of evil attack and attach themselves all the more as two people fighting against each other. When one sees that the other is taking the upper hand, it will redouble its effort against him. Likutey Moharan, Part 1, 65. Section 4. This corresponds to the splitting of the Red Sea, as in, the water was for them a wall, Exodus 14:22, which came about from the 10 walls. This is because the Jewish people as a whole correspond to the princess, to the Malkut of holiness that contains all Jewish souls. The king kidnapped her corresponds to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, whose power comes from his celestial angel, who is the Samek Mem, who is the angel of Egypt. This is the mystery of Sarah being taken to Pharaoh's palace, as well as to the palace of Avimelech. It all alludes to the exile in Egypt Ramban on Genesis 12:10, for all this corresponds to the kidnapping of the princess by the king in the story. The Malkut of evil foresaw that ultimately the princess would kill him, as in, God struck Pharaoh and his household on account of Sarah, Genesis 12:17, and God came to Avimelech in a dream at night and told him, "You are going to die on account of the woman you have taken," there 23. Similarly, when Pharaoh later sought to keep the Israelites in exile, it is written, "Let us outsmart them, lest they multiply, and fight against us, and leave the land," Exodus 1:10. The Malkut of evil foresees into the future that it will inevitably be destroyed, so it schemes what it can do to the princess, which is the Jewish people, until she ultimately flees from it, as in, the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, there 14:5. They came and told the king that the princess is near the castle of water, so the king went out with his army to capture her. This corresponds to, Pharaoh saddled his chariot and took his people with him. They overtook them encamping at the sea, there, verses 6-9. The princess fled into the water through all of the 10 walls, all the walls of water, as in, the water was for them a wall, were opened, on account of which they were able to pass through the sea safely, as in, the Israelites walked on dry land in the midst of the sea, whereas Pharaoh and his army who pursued them were drowned in the sea. The king shot 10 arrows at her. This corresponds to God's angel moved from going before them to going after them, there, verse 19, upon which Rashi comments, the angel absorbed all the arrows and stones the Egyptians shot at them. Nevertheless, though God's angel, the Shekhinah, absorbed the arrows, through which the Israelites were saved and were able to pass through the sea safely, the poison of the Egyptian arrows reached the Israelites and harmed them, for this battle was taking place above as well as below, in both the spiritual and the material realms. As written, Egypt was pursuing them, there, verse 10, which refers to the angel of Egypt pursuing them to help the Egyptians, Exodus, Rabbah 21:5. So when this angel, the Samek Mem, saw the Israelites fleeing into the sea, and the sea splitting before them, and the water becoming walls for them, at that point it shot arrows at them, in an attempt to penetrate and permeate them with the poison of his arrows, which is the foreign ideas of denials and idolatry. This corresponds to, they rebelled at the sea, by the Red Sea, Psalms 106:7, for the Israelites were saying, just as we are ascending from this side, the Egyptians are ascending at the other side, and will continue to pursue us. Erkine 15a, and as written, an idol passed through the sea, Zechariah 10:11. Sanhedrin 103b. Even then, there were some denials among the Israelites, for some foreign ideas had penetrated their minds on account of the arrows that were shot at them. This itself was the cause of all later contests that our ancestors waged against God with the golden calf, the spies, and other instances. These are the 10 contests, Avot 5:3, and they were caused by the 10 arrows that were shot at them into the 10 walls of water, from which we have still not healed. They are the cause of all of the Jewish people's illnesses in exile, as when the Jewish people cry out, "Support me with cakes, strengthen me with apples. For I am lovesick." Song of Songs 2:5, as in, well acquainted with illness. Isaiah 53:3, as in, from the sole of the foot to the head there is nothing whole, wound and injury. There 1:6. All of these illnesses are caused by the 10 types of arrows, which are the totality of the powers of the forces of evil, the armies of the inclination for evil, which shoot their poisonous arrows at Jewish souls. This is what causes all denials, doubts, confusions, obstructions, inappropriate lusts, and all the veils that separate and obstruct the Jewish soul from coming close to God. For each and every individual and the Jewish people as a whole, this endless exile is caused by the 10 types of arrows, as in, "Your arrows have descended upon me," Psalms 38:3, which King David, who corresponds to the Malkut of holiness, to the princess, to the totality of Jewish souls, cries out. This is, "He drew his bow and made me as the target of the arrow," Lamentations 3:12, which refers to the Jewish people in exile, and "They prepared their arrows on the string to shoot through the darkness into the upright of heart," Psalms 11:2. It would have been impossible for the princess to endure the pain of the extremely poisonous arrows, especially for such a long time, but God preceded the healing to the wound by helping her flee into the 10 walls of water, which are the Torah. The Torah is the essence of life and healing, for God's Torah is whole, restoring the soul. Psalms 19:8, restoring from the paths of death to the paths of life. The Jewish people, by fleeing into the waters of Torah, attain the strength to endure the bitterness of exile, which corresponds to the bitterness of the arrows, and had they not fled into the Torah, they would not have had the strength to endure it at all. Through the Torah, even though the arrows reached even into there, nevertheless, they now meanwhile at least have the strength to endure through the power of the Torah, which is the essence of vitality, as in, "It is your life," Deuteronomy 30:20. Furthermore, God grants strength to the weary, giving them strength to bear the bitterness of the arrows through the power of the Torah, such that ultimately an authentic healer will appear, which is the one who has the power in his hands to bring full healing. This corresponds to the song at the sea, which comes from the 10 types of melody. This is, "Then Moses Yasher." The verse does not say, "Shar sang," but "Yasher will sing," from which we derive that Moses will sing this in the future Sanhedrin 91b. Even though the song was indeed sung at that time, nevertheless, they were unable to fully evoke all 10 types of melody at that time, to fully complete the healing of the princess, but only an illumination from the 10 types of melody were they able to evoke into the song at the sea. The ultimate song in its totality, though, will be only in the future, with the coming of the Messiah, who is Moses himself, for that which was will be. Hence, then Moses will sing, specifically then will he sing the totality of all 10 types of melody, for then will the healing of the princess, corresponding to the Shekhinah and the Jewish people, be fully completed. For then will a new song be aroused, as in, "Sing to God a new song, for he has done amazing things." Psalms 98. One corresponding to a song of wonders, the simple, double, triple, and quadruple song that will be aroused in the future Likutey Moharan, Part 2, 8. That is why the song at the sea concludes with, "God will reign forever," in the future tense, for the manifestation of God's kingship, which corresponds to the healing of the princess, who is the Malkut of holiness, will be in the future, when his kingship will be manifest for all to see, as in, God will be king over the entire earth. Zechariah 14:9. And then there will be great rejoicing and mirth throughout the world, through the arousal of all the 10 types of melody that correspond to joy. This is, God has become king, the earth will rejoice. Psalms 97:1, as in, the heavens will rejoice, and the earth will exult. Among the nations they will declare, God is king. 1 Chronicles 16:31, with the fulfillment of the verse, "Sing to God, sing. Sing to our King, sing. For the King of the entire earth is God." Psalms 47, 7-8. For the ultimate manifestation of his kingship, corresponding to the healing of the princess, is through song and melody, as in the 10 types of melody, corresponding to praise God with a harp, sing to him with a 10-stringed lyre, sing to him a new song, there 33, 2-3, and many other verses in which is explicit that the manifestation of God's kingship will come about through song and melody, all of which corresponds to the 10 types of melody that are the healing of the princess, who corresponds to the manifestation of the Malchut of holiness, which is the acknowledgement that kingship is God's. Section 5. Upon reflection into this story, we find that the Rebbe speaks of 4 things, each of which is comprised of 10. 1. The 10 types of arrows. 2. The 10 walls of water. 1. And, which are the 10 types of charity. 3. The 10 types of pulse, which are the 10 measures of wisdom. 4. The 10 types of melody, which are the 10 types of winds. Study all this in the story. It is obvious to the understanding person that these allude to the 4 worlds of emanation, creation, formation, and action, as well as to all of the groups of 4 mentioned above, paragraph 3, such as the tanta, which are the cantillations, vowels, serifs, and letters, which correspond to the 4 divine names, which are the root of the 4 worlds, which correspond to the 4 fundamental elements of fire, air, water, and earth, which are the inanimate, the plant, the living creature, and the speaking creature. As explained in the Kabbalistic writings, as known, each one of each of these groups is comprised of 10 sfirot. Action, for instance, which corresponds to letters, to the name Ben, from which the fundamental element of earth, which corresponds to the inanimate, emerges, is comprised of 10. And similarly, formation, which corresponds to the name Ma, to the serifs, and so on. This corresponds to the 4 groups of 10 explained in the lesson. The 10 types of arrows are in the world of action, for the power of the forces of evil that are responsible for the arrows that oppress the Shekhinah and the Jewish people that correspond to the Malchut of holiness, to the princess, are mainly in the world of action. The 10 walls of water correspond to formation, which corresponds to the name Ma, which corresponds to the fundamental element of water. The 10 types of pulse correspond to creation, to the name Sag, to the vowels, for the 10 types of pulses are like vowels, as stated in the Tikkunim. Sometimes the pulse is like a tsaire, and sometimes like a shva or a kamatz, Tikkuni Zohar, 69, 108a. The 10 types of melody correspond to emanation, which corresponds to cantillations, for the cantillations correspond to the 10 types of melody as the singing of the cantillations. Hence, the 4 groups in the story are the 4 of Tanta, which correspond to the 4 names that comprise all worlds. From all of them, we must evoke all of the rectifications that they contain in order to heal the princess and rescue her from the old king, the Malchut of evil. For the ultimate purpose of the devolution of all worlds from beginning to end was only for the purpose of the Malchut, to manifest God's kingship. Section 6. Hence, the world of action corresponds to earth, to which the power of the arrows, corresponding to the intensified power of the forces of evil, the realm of evil, is most greatly attached. For this reason, the closer something is to the earth, the more that the filth is attached to it, which is why worms that crawl on the earth, which are the closest to the earth of all creatures, for they literally crawl on the earth, are all forbidden to eat. There are no species permissible to eat, but all are forbidden, as in any crawling creature that crawls on the earth, specifically that crawls on the earth, for the grip of the realm of evil is so attached to it, as in a serpent's food is earth, Isaiah 65, 25, as in you shall eat earth all the days of your life, Genesis 3:14, which is why the 10 types of arrows arise from the earth and why all these species are forbidden. However, worms that develop in detached fruit, as long as they have not emerged from the fruit, are not in the category of that crawls on the earth and are therefore permissible to eat. This is because the essential prohibition of worms is because they crawl on the earth, to which the realm of evil corresponding to the arrows is most attached. Section 7. This corresponds to the recitation of the Torah section regarding the daily burnt offering, which is meant to purify and rectify the world of action, essentially to subdue the specific force of evil, called Tola worm, through the Olat Tamid daily burnt offering Pri Etz Chaim, Olam Ha'asiyah, Chapter 3. There, in the world of action, is the greatest attachment of the Tola, which is a very strong force of evil, from which devolve all worms that crawl on the earth, which are the epitome of the filth in the world of action, which are subdued through the sacrificial offerings, specifically the daily burnt offering. The Olat Tamid, for all the sacrifices are very exalted and have the power to purify the intense filth of the world of action. As explained in the story, this beggar possessed the power in his hands to shoot an arrow and to retrieve it, through which he had the power to heal the princess. It seems strange, though, why the beggar boasted of his ability to shoot an arrow and retrieve it, when it would have been sufficient for him to just mention his ability to retrieve a shot arrow, which is essentially all he required in the context of the story to be able to heal the princess by extracting all the arrows that the king had shot into her. His ability to shoot arrows seems to be unnecessary, better to not shoot them in the first place. However, the ability to shoot the arrows is also necessary for the healing, which is the mystery of ameliorating judgments at their source. So it in fact would have been impossible for him to extract the arrows from the princess unless he would also shoot arrows at her and retrieve them, through which he would automatically extract and neutralize all the poisonous arrows that the king had shot into her. This is because the arrows of the Malchut of evil, which is the intensification of the forces of evil, all come from the intensification of judgments, and it is impossible to extract and neutralize them other than through the amelioration of judgments, and judgments can only be ameliorated at their root. That is why this beggar, who was involved in the healing of the princess, could only heal her by shooting arrows at her, corresponding to the root of judgments. However, these arrows that correspond to judgments would not harm her, but specifically through them would he, on the contrary, ameliorate the judgments at their root, extracting from her all the arrows that had been shot at her, thus healing her. This corresponds to the slaughtering of the sacrificial offerings, which purify the world of action, to which the 10 types of poisonous arrows are attached. The sword knife of slaughter corresponds to the intensity of judgments, but specifically through that do we ameliorate and neutralize the intensity of judgments, from which arises the grip of the realm of evil, which corresponds to the arrows that correspond to Esau's sword, as in, "You shall live upon your sword," Genesis 27:40. Esau is in fact called after the world of action, for he is the epitome of the intense filth in the world of action. For a sword and arrows are in the same category as written, a club, a sword, a sharpened arrow. Proverbs 25:18. Similarly, in holiness, the verse says about God, "When I sharpen the blade of my sword and hold onto judgment with my hand," Deuteronomy 32:41, upon which Rashi comments, "A human being shoots an arrow and is unable to retrieve it, but God can shoot an arrow and retrieve it," and the Rebbe in fact cites this verse there in the story. Hence, a sword and an arrow are in the same category, and thus, through the slaughter of the sacrificial offerings with a sword knife which corresponds to arrows, corresponding to the intense judgments of holiness, through this we extract from the animal all the arrows of the realm of evil, which are all the admixture of evil, the intense spirit of animality that is attached to it. But through the sword of the ritual slaughter, we ameliorate the judgments at their root, and extract from the animal all the evil, sorting out the human spirit from the animal spirit, the good from the evil, by shooting the arrows and retrieving them, which corresponds to the slaughter. That is why the ritual slaughter is essentially an extending and retrieving movement of the knife, as our sages said, Chulin 30b. For the essence of the ritual slaughter is the extending and retrieving corresponding to the shooting and retrieving of the arrows, which corresponds to the amelioration of judgments at their root. This corresponds to what the Rebbe writes in Likutey Moharan, Part 2.8, about the powerful one who prays a prayer of judgment, extracting specifically through this prayer, as judgment from the realm of evil, all of the holiness that it has swallowed. This is as said, for when the prayer is as judgment, because compassion has been damaged and sexual lust has intensified, the realm of evil then swallows the prayer. So when the realm of evil intensifies, which corresponds to the arrows that are shot at the Shekhinah, then the powerful one must pray specifically a prayer of judgment, for that is from where the realm of evil draws its nourishment. Hence, this prayer itself corresponds to arrows, but specifically, through this prayer, as judgment of the powerful one, he then extracts all the arrows from the Shekhinah, from the princess, for specifically through this prayer, as judgment of the powerful one, does he subdue and neutralize the realm of evil and extract all that it has swallowed, through which the arrows shot at the princess are extracted and neutralized, all of which corresponds to the amelioration of judgments at their root. Elsewhere, we have explained that ritual slaughter itself corresponds to prayer as judgment of the powerful one, Laws of Priestly Gifts, Law 2. Section 8. This corresponds to fish and grasshoppers that require no ritual slaughter, which our sages derived from the verse, any living creature that moves about in the water, and any creature that crawls on the earth, Leviticus 11. 46 grasshoppers are juxtaposed to fish and require no ritual slaughter. Chulin 66a. This can be explained with the castle of water, that alludes to the mystery of the wisdom and intelligence that is in the vacated space, that came about on account of the constriction. But you must first study well the lesson in Likutey Moharan, Part 1, 64, and contemplate also the manuscript I found of the Rebbe's own handwritten version of this lesson, where he himself states, "This corresponds to the castle of water printed at the end of the Likutey Moharan." The story states, there is a castle of water in which there are 10 walls, one inside of the other, all of water. Even the ground that is walked upon within the castle is of water, as well as all the trees and fruit that are there, all of water. The beauty of this castle and its amazing uniqueness is self-evident. For a castle of water is obviously a very amazing novelty, but it is impossible to enter into this castle, for whoever enters it would be drowned in the water, since it is entirely water. But the princess fled into it. All this can be said to allude to the vacated space from which God constricted his light, such that it appears that there is no light of wisdom and intelligence in it, which is why in fact it is impossible to find his godliness in it through any wisdom and intelligence. However, the truth is that even in the vacated space itself, there is God's light, which is wisdom and intelligence. Only that this intelligence is concealed and hidden within the constriction of the vacated space, which cannot be perceived or understood at this time until the future, when it will be manifested that the vacated space is like the garment of an insect that is part and parcel of the insect itself. This corresponds to, "My righteousness will attest for me on a future day." Genesis 30, 33, as in, "I have donned righteousness." Job 29, 14. Study all this there well. Hence, even the constriction itself, which is the vacated space, is in fact created with wisdom, just as the rest of the entire creation. As in, "You created all of them with wisdom." Psalms 104:24. Only that it is impossible in this world to understand this intelligence, how in fact God's light, which is the light of wisdom, is to be found even in the vacated space, even though it is vacated, so that there would be space for creation. It is totally impossible to grasp this now with the human intelligence until the future, as explained there well. This corresponds to the 10 walls of water. Water corresponds to wisdom and intelligence, as in, the earth will be filled with knowledge as water covers the seabed. Isaiah 11:9. There in the water, in the authentic wisdom and intelligence that will be manifested in the future, there is a castle of water, which is the 10 walls of water, the amazing and awesome constructions, gardens, fruit, all of water. It is completely impossible for us to understand with our intelligence how to construct a building of water. But this itself corresponds to the vacated space, which in fact contains intelligence and came into existence entirely through intelligence, which corresponds to water. In other words, the entire creation and the entire constriction of creation, which is the vacated space, all came about through God's compassion, which corresponds to water, only that we are unable to understand this. This corresponds to the castle of water that was constructed of 10 walls, all of water. For water corresponds to intelligence, and the 10 walls allude to the totality of creation that was created with 10 sayings that correspond to the 10 rectifications of the 10 sfirot. All these, the 10 rectifications, the 10 sfirot, the 10 sayings, which are the totality of creation, would have been impossible to actualize and manifest without the constriction of the vacated space, for there would have otherwise not been any place for creation. But nevertheless, the ultimate truth is that even in the vacated space itself, there is intelligence, and therefore it is not really vacated, only that we are unable to understand how this can be. Hence, the entire creation and the entire constriction of the vacated space all came about from the water itself, which corresponds to intelligence, though it is impossible to understand this with intelligence. That is why, indeed, this castle of water was an amazing novelty, and no human being was able to enter it, for he would be drowned in the bottomless water. For there is certainly no one who is able to enter into the vacated space to analyze it with intelligence, because they would be drowned. Regarding this, the verse says, "All who enter it will not return." Proverbs 2:19, as stated in the lesson. Thus, even the material world came into existence from the water, for God created water, the first thing of all creation. As our sages said, initially, the world was water in water. Yerushalmi Chagiga 2:1. And then he created the entire creation from that water, as written, "Let the waters gather, and let the dry land be seen." Genesis 1:9. Hence, the earth itself came into being from the water. Then, from the earth, God created all things that grow from the earth. So therefore, everything came into existence from the water, for the earth itself came into existence only from the water. As written, "He who spreads out the earth upon the water." Psalms 136:6. All this is alluded to in saying that everything came into existence from the 10 walls of water, which are the root of the entire creation, which came into existence through the wisdom in the constriction, in God's constricting the light of his wisdom to the side's wisdom, which corresponds to water. In fact, the entire constriction itself comes from water, for even in the constriction is hidden and concealed wisdom and intelligence, only that it is impossible to grasp it. Hence, everything comes from water. All the structures, which are the totality of creation, with all of the constrictions, are all from water, for everything comes from wisdom and intelligence, only that it is impossible to grasp this, since we must not analyze the vacated space. That is why in this material world, the essence of creation is based upon the fundamental element of the material earth, for the free-willed human being, who is the ultimate purpose of all creation, was created specifically on earth. For the water had to be constricted until it became material earth, so that the human being and all other creatures could live on it. In the water, it would not be possible for the human being to live. For water is the mystery of the intelligence of the constriction, which will not be revealed until the future, when the earth will be filled with knowledge of God as water covers the seabed, specifically, as water covers the seabed. In other words, knowledge will then be manifested literally as the water that covers the seabed, in which is the 10 walls of water that come from the mystery of the intelligence of the constriction of the vacated space. But in the future, this knowledge will be revealed. Then all will know God with amazing intelligence, that though He constricted His light to the sides so that there would be place for creation, nevertheless, there is no place empty of Him, and He fills all worlds and surrounds all worlds. We will grasp the intelligence of the vacated space, and this knowledge will fill specifically the earth as water covers the seabed, meaning that we will know that all this is like the water that covers the seabed, in which there are the 10 walls that have not hitherto been manifested in the world, but then we will perceive these 10 walls. And just as we will then perceive these 10 walls, which correspond to the water that covers the seabed, so will we be able to know God, for it is all one and the same. As long as the intelligence of the vacated space is not yet revealed, it is impossible to fully know God, which is why nowadays we are sustained mainly through the faith that the authentic tzaddikim imbue us with. For even now, they receive an illumination of that knowledge that comes from the intelligence that will be manifested in the future. But in the future, with this intelligence, it will also be revealed that even in the vacated space is God's light hidden. Then, all questions and doubts and confusions regarding God, including the questions that come from the vacated space, will be resolved, as explained in the lesson in Likutey Moharan, Part 1, 64. Study there well. Now the verse is very precise. The earth will be filled with knowledge of God as the waters that cover the seabed. For knowledge literally corresponds to the water of the sea, which is the mystery of the 10 walls of water, which are the mystery of the vacated space that will be revealed in the future. All of the 10 types of arrows come from the breaking of the vessels, from which arose the forces of evil, which correspond to the arrows as said earlier. But the main breakage was in the name Ben, which corresponds to earth, whereas water corresponds to the new name of Ma, from which arises the rectification. That is why the 10 walls of water, which are the mystery of the intelligence of the vacated space that will be manifested in the future, which corresponds to the rectification, are in the water. This is because the breakage took place on account of the great hiddenness of the mystery of the intelligence of the constriction, from which arose intense judgments, on account of which the judgments, the dregs that were left in the vessels, intensified, on account of which the vessels were unable to contain the light, which was too strong for them. As a result, they broke, from which the forces of evil came into existence. But in the future, when the intelligence of the constriction of the vacated space will be manifested, the breakage will be completely rectified, and all forces of evil will disappear. Hence, even the questions that arise on account of the overabundance of light, on account of the breaking of the vessels, also draw their power and nourishment from the vacated space, that is, the questions that come from the vacated space that cannot be answered for the coming into existence of the forces of evil as a result of the breakage was mainly from the very incipience of the constriction, which is the root of judgment. Understand all this well. Study well in the writings of the Ari, and you will find these things well explained, if you have intelligent eyes. And we can see for ourselves that these questions are all intertwined, such that even the questions that arose from the forces of evil that came into existence as a result of the breakage and that can be answered are also rooted and intertwined with those questions that come from the vacated space that cannot be answered. That is why one must not enter into these questions at all, for even those questions that can be answered can, in the blink of an eye, lead a person to those questions that cannot be answered, since they are all intertwined. For even the forces of evil that came into existence from the breakage are rooted and sustained from the incipience of the constriction of the vacated space. For if the mystery of the constriction would not be hidden, the forces of evil could not have come into existence at all. Thus, in the future, when the mystery of the intelligence of the constriction will be manifested, the forces of evil will indeed completely vanish, and he will swallow death forever, Isaiah 25:8, and I will remove the spirit of defilement from the earth, Zechariah 13:2. This corresponds to the new name of Ma, which corresponds to the world of rectification that comes from Atik. The ultimate wholeness of the rectification will be completed only in the future, even though the rectification actually began from the very incipience of creation, as can be understood from the Kabbalistic writings, which corresponds to the mystery of the new name of Ma that was brought about in order to rectify the vessels, from which the entire emanation and all of creation came about. Nevertheless, there still remained some sparks within the shells for the sake of free choice, the sorting out of which will only be completed with the coming of the Messiah. On account of these sparks that have yet to be sorted out, which correspond to the shards of the vessels that were not rectified so that there will be free choice, since the intelligence of the vacated space has still not fully shined into them, which is the essence of the rectification. As said, the forces of evil still have the ability to influence, which is the questions and denials of the scientists and philosophers, from where the inclination for evil draws its power. Laws of the afternoon prayer, 4:14, and from which arise all of the 10 types of arrows that come from the breakage of the vessels that are still not sorted out. Thus, though the princess fled into the 10 walls of water, which correspond to the rectification, nevertheless, she was overtaken by the 10 types of arrows that have their power from the judgments that are still not sorted out. This is our task throughout our lives, to sort out the good from the bad, to sort out and rectify the remainders of the sparks in order to extract the arrows from the princess and to heal her. Every individual, to the extent of their sins, empowers the shards of the vessels that overwhelm the Shekhinah with arrows, as in, "Your arrows have descended upon me," Psalms 38:3, and in, "He drew his bow and set me as the target for the arrow," Lamentations 3:12, which refers to the time of exile that was caused by Jewish sins. Regarding this is said, "He is wounded by our transgressions and afflicted by our iniquities, a man of pains and well acquainted with illness," Isaiah 53:3-5, which speaks of the soul of the Messiah that endures suffering and oppression, and who is the Malkut of holiness, corresponding to the princess that endures pain and afflictions from the 10 types of arrows. On the other hand, every individual, to the extent of their repentance and good deeds, increases the power of the tzaddik who is devoted to healing the princess, to extract from her all of the arrows and to heal her. Throughout the exile, it is said of the Shekhinah and the Jewish people, "Your brokenness is vaster than the sea. Who can heal you?" Lamentations 2:13, and, "Is there no balm in Gilead, no healer there? For why has my people's recovery not come?" Jeremiah 8:22, and, "Every head is ill, and every heart is broken. From sole of the foot to the head, there is nothing whole, wounds and bruises." Isaiah 1:5-6, all this from the arrows. But regarding the future, "I have stricken, but I will heal." Deuteronomy 32:39, "I will heal with what I have stricken." Leviticus Rabbah 18:5, as in, "My hand holds onto judgment." Deuteronomy 32:41, which is the shooting and retrieving of the arrow, through which the princess is healed, which corresponds to the amelioration of judgments at their root. Section 9. The entire Torah and the commandments are all for the purpose of sorting out the sparks that remained from the breakage of the vessels, through which we extract the arrows from the princess. This corresponds to ritual slaughter, which corresponds to the amelioration of judgments at their source, which corresponds to the ability of the powerful one to shoot the arrows and retrieve them. The ultimate amelioration of judgments at their root is achieved in this way. by evoking an illumination from the world of rectification, from the intelligence of the mystery of the constriction that will be revealed in the future, through which all judgments will be ameliorated at their root. The essence of the root of all judgments is at the incipience of the constriction, from which the harsh judgments devolved and came into existence as a result of the increased power of the forces of evil which had come into existence from the shards of the vessels. So when we seek to ameliorate judgments, it can only be done at their root, meaning that we must ascend to the root of judgment that comes from the incipience of the constriction of the vacated space. Whoever is able to enter into this space, such as the great tzaddikim of the generations who correspond to Moses, they are able to ameliorate all the judgments at their root. This is because the greatest power of judgments is facilitated by the very hiddenness of the intelligence of the vacated space, since the essence of all judgments is caused by a concealment of knowledge. For knowledge corresponds to compassion, whereas the concealment of knowledge corresponds to judgments. See Likutey Moharan, Part 1, 31 and 56. And the essence of all concealment of knowledge comes from the concealment of the knowledge that is in the vacated space, from which all judgments, forces of evil and questions derive their power. Hence, whoever is able to enter into the incipience of the constriction of the vacated space, with the knowledge and perception that even there is God hidden and concealed, and draw from there an illumination of knowledge and rectification that will be revealed in the future through this, are automatically dissolved and ameliorated all judgments that are nourished by this constriction, hiddenness, since it is now revealed that even there is God to be found. This corresponds to the amelioration of judgments at their root, for precisely through the incipience of the constriction, which is the root of all judgments, by knowing that even there is God hidden, is everything rectified. Section 10. Thus, the essence of ritual slaughter corresponds to the amelioration of judgments at their root by evoking and arousing the root of judgment, which is the incipience of the constriction, which corresponds to the sword knife of the ritual slaughter. By fulfilling God's commandments with this sword and slaughtering, as He has instructed us, we thereby manifest that even in the harsh judgment corresponding to the sword, knife is hidden and concealed, His wisdom and compassion. For ultimately, the ritual slaughter is a great compassion for the living creature, since it is its rectification for eternity. Thus, through the mitzvah of ritual slaughter, we thereby ameliorate the judgments at their root and sort out the good from the evil, the human spirit from the animal spirit, which corresponds to a lack of knowledge, to the dregs of judgments, sorting out and ameliorating them through the slaughter knife, corresponding to the amelioration of judgments at their root. For this reason, fish and grasshoppers do not require ritual slaughter, for fish and grasshoppers are rooted in the rectification that will be revealed in the future, so they require no ritual slaughter. Fish grow in water, which corresponds to the 10 walls of water that correspond to the rectification that will be revealed in the future, which is why tzaddikim are compared to fish. Since the tzaddikim correspond to the Messiah Likutey Moharan, Part 1, 2 to the world of rectification, in that they evoke amazing rectifications in every generation from the rectification that will be manifested in the future, which corresponds to the 10 walls of water. These walls of water are sustained by the power of the mitzvah of charity, as explained in the story. That is why the kosher signs of fish are fins and scales, but mainly scales. For whichever has scales has fins, but some have fins but no scales. Niddah 51b for scales correspond to charity, as in, He donned charity as a shield. Isaiah 59:17. And a shield corresponds to scales, as explained well in Laws of Fish, Law 4. This is because charity corresponds to the intelligence of the vacated space that will be manifested in the future, which is that it is like the exoskeleton garment of an insect that is part of parcel of itself. As in, my righteousness will attest for me on a future day, Genesis 30:33, and I have donned righteousness, Job 14, as explained well in Likutey Moharan, Part 1, 64. Hence, tzedakah charity corresponds to the walls of water, which correspond to the rectification that will be manifested in the future, which corresponds to charity, as said. Similarly, in the laws of fish, Law 4, it is explained well that charity corresponds to water study there well, for it is relevant to here, since charity corresponds to the 10 walls of water that correspond to the world of rectification, which is the intelligence of the vacated space that will be revealed in the future, which corresponds to charity, as in, I have donned righteousness. That is why grasshoppers also are like fish and are exempt from ritual slaughter. Grasshoppers also correspond to the rectification that will be manifested in the future, for the constriction is like the garment of an insect that is part and parcel of itself, as explained in Likutey Moharan, Part 1, 64, as in, I will hereby bring locusts tomorrow in your borders. Exodus 10, 4. So grasshoppers are juxtaposed to fish and exempt from ritual slaughter, for their root comes from the rectification that will be revealed in the future, so they surely do not require ritual slaughter. For the essence of ritual slaughter corresponds to the amelioration of judgments at their root, to evoke the rectification of the intelligence at the incipience of the constriction that will be manifested in the future. Therefore, since fish and grasshoppers themselves come from this realm, they do not require ritual slaughter. Section 11. Thus, the Rebbe writes in the story that the walls of water are held in place by the winds, and that the healing of the princess is achieved through the 10 types of melody that are attained by the one who is able to weigh in his hands all of the 10 types of winds. The walls of water, which correspond to the intelligence of the vacated space, is impossible to grasp other than through melody, as explained well in Likutey Moharan, Part 1, 64, where it is stated that the ultimate rectification is attained through melody, which corresponds to, then Moses sang, as in, Come, sing from the top of Amana, Song of Songs 4, 8, study all this there well. In fact, all of the 4 categories spoken about in the story, such as Tanta and so forth, are all interdependent, ascending, and being rectified through each other, as can be understood from the story where the princess fled from the arrows into the walls of water, which themselves are held in place by the winds, which correspond to the spirit of the pulse and the spirit of the melody. For the spirit of the melody sustains the spirit of the pulse. Likutey Moharan, Part 2, 24. Even the 4 elements of Tanta are interdependent and intertwined. But the ultimate, complete rectification is attained through the cantillations, the melody of the cantillations, which is the root of all, and the rectification of everything, as can be understood from the Ari's writings and from the story. Understand all this well. An outline. This outline has been printed in earlier editions after the laws of Pesach, Law 9, but they are out of place there, so we have copied them to here. Some allusions in the story of the 6th day of the 7 beggars, regarding the one who had the power in his hands to extract the arrows, where he lists 4 things: extracting the arrows, entering into the walls of water through the power of charity, knowing the 10 types of pulses through the power in his hands, and playing the 10 types of melodies through the power to cause and restrain the windstorm, each of which are comprised of 10. This was in the context of the story of the princess who was desired by the king and who fled into the 10 walls of water, and that the beggar can heal her. The mystery of this story is extremely exalted beyond our comprehension, but we have been given permission by the Rebbe to seek for allusions to the best of our ability. Yet, nevertheless, we have no idea who the characters are, what the events mean, and when it all took place, as stated at the end of the story. So, I present here some allusions that have arisen in my mind, with God's help. Outline 1. There are 4 worlds: emanation, creation, formation, and action, that are rooted in the 4 letters of the name Hashem, which correspond to the 4 names of Ab, Sag, Ma, Ben, which correspond to cantillations, vowels, serifs, and letters, from which the four fundamental elements of fire, air, water, and earth emerge, which correspond to inanimate, plant, living creature, and speaking creature, which correspond to the four parts of prayer, beginning with the recital of the sacrificial service, which corresponds to action. But even before that, we rectify with action, as in, one must relieve oneself, wash one's hands, put on the talit, and affix the tefillin on the arm and head. Pri Etz Chaim, prayer. Chapter 1. It is explained at the beginning of the Etz Chaim that regarding cantillations, which correspond to Ab, there is nothing to say at all, and the beginning of manifestation only begins with Sag, which corresponds to the vowels, from which there is a devolution from level to level until the name Ben appears. But at this point, there is the breakage, after which it is rectified through the light of the new name Ma, which merges with the name Ben, a merger from which all worlds, from beginning to end, came into existence. Our entire task in the service of Torah and commandments is to rectify and elevate the sparks that remained among the realm of evil, as a result of the breakage of the vessels, the 288 sparks that have still not been sorted out. All this is the mystery of the princess who fled into the walls of water. As known, the ultimate purpose of creation and the entire devolution was in order to manifest God's kingship, for which purpose all the kings came into existence. But on account of the dregs, they were broken, from which the forces and realm of evil came into existence for the purpose of free choice. These dregs and the realm of evil correspond to the malchut of evil that counters the malchut of holiness, and they constantly seek and wait in ambush to capture the princess into their realm in order to strengthen their own malchut kingdom and to conceal the malchut of evil. The entire creation was for the purpose of manifesting God's kingship, for from the very beginning God desired that His presence be manifested below. That is why the angels Azza and Azael argued against the very creation. What is the human being that you should consider him? Arguing against the manifestation of God's kingship, which is impossible without the creation of the material world. And all those who argued this way drew their nourishment from the malchut of evil. In the kingdoms of each of the 7 primordial kings of Edom, each of whom died prematurely, the malchut of holiness was taken captive by the evil king, corresponding to the kings of Edom, which corresponds to the sparks of the holy kings that remained among the forces of evil, from which the kings of Edom, who seize the sparks of the malchut of holiness, draw their nourishment. Ever since then, the princess attempts to flee from them, until finally she flees into the walls of water, which correspond to the rectification to the light of the new name Ma, which corresponds to the fundamental element of water. That is why water purifies from all defilement. This corresponds to the extraction of the arrows, which is the rising from defilement to purity, the arrows corresponding to the forces of evil and the dregs of the malchut of holiness that have still not been sorted out. The fleeing of the malchut into the walls of water corresponds to the creation of the world, which is essentially water, which was the first thing to be created, and upon which the entire world stands, as written, "Who spreads out the earth upon the water?" Psalms 136:6. The earth and everything that develops from it all came into existence from the water, which was the first thing to be created. The entire creation came into existence from the water through the 10 sayings, which is why there are 10 walls. This corresponds to, the earth was chaos and void, with darkness upon the surface of the deep, Genesis 1:2, which corresponds to the arrows, and the Spirit of God, which is the Spirit of the Messiah, the malchut of holiness, hovered upon the surface of the water, for that is where she fled to. The entire service of the tzaddikim and of the Jewish people as a whole is to extract the arrows. Outline 2. This corresponds to the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which corresponds to plants, which is the fundamental element of water. The ultimate point of free choice takes place here, in water, which corresponds to purity, for earth corresponds to Ben and water corresponds to Ma. The initial thought was to create the world with justice, corresponding to Ben, to earth, to which the arrows are mainly attached. But God saw that the world could not survive with only justice. So he merged it with compassion, which corresponds to Ma, and created the world with both. That is what gave rise to free choice, for earth on its own could not survive, and the ultimate rectification will come about through the Messiah. But even now, the entire service of the tzaddikim is regarding this. This corresponds to the splitting of the Red Sea, as in, the waters were for them a wall on their right and on their left. Exodus 14:22. While the angel of God there, verse 19, the Shekhinah absorbed the arrows. This corresponds to the 10 times that the Israelites tested God, the first one being, they rebelled at the sea, Psalms 106:7, to Moses' mission to Pharaoh, to transform the water to blood, and then taking the people out through the splitting of the Red Sea, to every male born shall you cast into the Nile, Exodus 1:22, and Moses himself was cast into the water, since in the future he will have to heal the princess inside the water, for whatever was, will be. Furthermore, Pharaoh's own daughter, who corresponds to the Malchut that was captured by the king, went down to the Nile to immerse herself from the idols, Megillah 13a, for from the water I took him out, Exodus 2:10. Outline 3. The 10 types of arrows correspond to the totality of all obstacles to holiness that obstruct from all sides. Some do this through seductive words that introduce questions and denials into a person's thoughts, some through seduction to lusts, others through negative traits such as anger and haughtiness, and others more literally through arrows, those who fight with swords or arrows to prevent people from entering the land of Israel, the boundaries of holiness. When all these types gather together, they correspond to the 10 types of arrows. They all correspond to earth, to which the realm of evil is most attached, as in, a serpent's food is earth, Isaiah 65:25. That is why it is forbidden to eat worms that crawl on the earth, for the breakage took place mainly in Ben, in earth. The greatest blemish is sadness, in contrast to joy, which is why the princess healing is through joy, the 10 types of melody. The 10 types of pulses correspond to the vowels, which correspond to the world of creation. For the pulse corresponds to vowels, there is a pulse, like a tsaire, Tikkunei Zohar, 69:108a. This beggar is able to transmit power into the hands of the appointees, the celestial ministers in charge of the world, all of whom correspond to the Malchut, and upon whom the strength or weakness of the Malchut of holiness depends. That is why it is possible to know from the pulse the condition and health of the Malchut. One who is able to stop the windstorm knows the melody, which corresponds to the singing of the cantillations, which correspond to Ab, to the world of emanation. For the singing of the cantillations is through the wind, going through the lobes of the lungs, specifically the north wind, the calm wind that plays upon David's lyre. Corresponding to the cantillations, to Ab, to emanation, is the speaking creature, as in, a windstorm does his word, Psalms 148:8. In the beginning God created. The Torah should have begun from the power of his deeds, Rashi, Genesis 1:1, specifically the power of his deeds. Corresponding to the power in the hands through which the land of Israel is conquered, in which the Malchut of holiness is most manifested, but which is now languishing in weakness in the seas and rivers surrounding the land of Israel, as in, the earth is God's. For he established it upon seas, Psalms 24:2. There, in the land of Israel, are all of the 10 levels of holiness, into which it is impossible to enter, other than through the purification of water. God gave the nations the land and took it away from them. This corresponds to the shooting of the arrows, on account of which the land of Israel was given into the hands of the nations, and retrieving the arrows corresponds to He and took it away from them and gave it to us. Outline 4. That I took from the hand of the Amorite with my sword and my arrow. Genesis 48:22. I shall not rely on my arrow. Psalms 44:7. They prepare their arrows upon the bow. There, 11:2. For your arrows have descended into me, and you have laid your hands upon me. There, 38:2. As a target for the arrow. Lamentations 3:12. The arrows are beyond you. I will shoot the 3 arrows to the side. 1 Samuel 20:20-21. I shall intoxicate my arrows with blood. Deuteronomy 32:42. Prayer is the drawing of the bow with the arrows. Likutey Moharan, Part 1, 2, and 55, Part 2, 83. Fortunate is the one who knows how to shoot arrows such that they will pierce the liver of the realm of evil. Tikkunei Zohar 13:29b. Your arrows have descended upon me, for my iniquities are as a heavy burden. Psalms 38:3-5. The liver is filled with blood, Bechorot 55a, in contrast to glory, which corresponds to the 10 sayings that are for God's glory. The ultimate expression of the 10 sayings with which the world was created was for the charity that human beings would do, for which the world was created, as in, the world will be constructed with loving kindness. Psalms 89:3, as in, these are the generations of the heaven and the earth when they were created. Genesis 2:4, in Abraham, the man of loving kindness. Genesis Rabbi 12:9. This is who loves charity, God's loving kindness. Psalms 33:5, followed by, in God's word were the heavens made, and in the spirit of his mouth all of their hosts. Your mouth means charity, Rosh Hashanah 6a, which corresponds to water, as in, cast your bread upon the water. Ecclesiastes 11:1. Likutey Moharan, Part 2, 15.